8:16 a.m. Eastern Time. Inside the Capitol complex, a legislative aide refreshes a vote count spreadsheet for the third time in under 10 minutes, not because anything has changed, but because something might. Signal number 1, 51 votes, that's the number, not 60, not a supermajority, just a simple majority. Because reconciliation changes the rules. It bypasses the filibuster, removes the need for bipartisan agreement, and turns the entire process into a numbers game. Here's what nobody is telling you. This isn't just about a budget, it's about control. Because if Republicans unify, they don't need Democrats at all. And that's the shift. By 8:42 a.m., a message is posted. Short, direct. Donald J. Trump calls on Republicans to come together and push the reconciliation process forward. No hesitation, no ambiguity, just pressure. Signal number 2. Because this is not a suggestion, it's a directive. And directives at this level carry weight. But here's the catch. Unity is not automatic, especially inside a party that is not fully aligned. Because within the Republican caucus, there are divisions. Fiscal conservatives who want deeper cuts, moderates who want flexibility, and leadership trying to hold both sides together. That's the internal friction. And friction slows momentum, but it doesn't stop it, not yet. By 9:06 a.m. inside a Senate office building, a group of lawmakers gather behind closed doors. No cameras, no staff beyond a select few. Because this is where the real negotiation happens, not between parties, within them. And that's where the first cracks appear. One senator raises concerns about spending levels, another pushes for faster timelines, a third warns about political fallout. Because while reconciliation simplifies the vote, it complicates the politics. Signal number 3. Because bypassing Democrats may win the vote, but it also concentrates responsibility. If the plan fails, there's no one else to blame. But here's the catch. Failure is not the expectation. Momentum is, because outside that room, pressure is building. Media coverage intensifies, statements multiply, and the narrative begins to form. Republicans must act. Now, by 9:48 a.m., a draft framework begins circulating. Not final, not public, but detailed. Spending adjustments, tax provisions, deficit targets, each line item carrying political weight, each number representing negotiation. Because budgets are not just financial documents, they are political statements, and this one is being shaped under pressure. But here's the catch. Pressure can produce results, or fractures, and fractures are already visible. By 10:22 a.m., another signal emerges. A senior Republican publicly expresses hesitation, not opposition, but concern. And that distinction matters, because concern can be addressed. Opposition is harder to move. Signal number 4. Because the margin is thin, very thin. With 51 votes needed, losing even 2 or 3 changes everything. And that's where the strategy becomes critical. Because this is no longer about policy, it's about counting. Who's in, who's out, who's undecided, and how to move them. By 11:05 a.m., the process shifts again, from discussion to persuasion. Phone calls, private meetings, direct conversations, because at this stage, every vote matters, individually and collectively. And that's where Trump's role becomes central, because his influence is not procedural. It's political. He doesn't draft the bill, he shapes the support. And support is what determines the outcome. But here's the catch. Influence has limits, especially when policy and politics collide, because some lawmakers are not just responding to pressure, they're responding to constituencies, to voters, to future elections. And those factors cannot be overridden easily. By 11:52 a.m., the numbers are updated again, still close, still uncertain, because a few votes remain in question, and those votes hold the balance. But here's the catch. The system is moving slowly but forward. Because once momentum begins, it builds. And as it builds, resistance becomes harder to sustain. By 12:18 p.m., another development, a revised proposal, smaller adjustments, targeted changes, designed to secure specific votes. Because this is not a fixed plan, it is a flexible one, adapting in real time to secure the numbers. Signal number 5. Because flexibility is the key to passage, not rigidity, and that flexibility may be enough. But here's the catch. Every adjustment has consequences, because changing one part of the plan affects another, and those ripple effects can create new problems, new resistance, new negotiations. By 1:03 p.m., the pressure intensifies again. Public statements, media coverage, political messaging, all reinforcing the same idea. This must pass. Because failure is not just a legislative setback. It's a political one. And political setbacks carry long-term consequences. But here's the catch. The vote has not happened yet. And until it does, nothing is certain. Because in Washington, certainty only exists after the result. And until then, everything remains in motion. Because this is not just a vote. It's a test of unity, of strategy, of control. And within the next 24 to 72 hours, that test will be decided. Either Republicans unify and the reconciliation passes, or they don't, and the entire strategy collapses. And if it collapses, the consequences extend far beyond this bill, because control, once lost, is not easily regained. So now the system waits, not for debate, not for discussion, but for alignment. Because alignment is the only thing that matters now, and without it, there is only one outcome: pass or fail, control or collapse, victory or setback. 1:42 p.m. Eastern Time. Inside a narrow hallway just off the Senate chamber, two lawmakers stop mid-conversation as a senior party whip approaches with a printed sheet. Not a speech, not a proposal, a count. Signal number 6, 48 confirmed. 3 leaning, 2 unknown. That's the board. And in reconciliation, the board is everything, because there is no backup plan, no bipartisan fallback, no second path, just numbers. And numbers, at this stage, are fluid. Here's what nobody is telling you. Those last 2 votes are not just undecided. They are being negotiated in real time, not in committees, not in public hearings, in private conversations, behind closed doors, because that's how alignment is built. Not announced, constructed. But here's the catch. Every vote comes with a price: policy concessions, spending adjustments, timeline changes, and each concession alters the original plan. By 2:05 p.m., the first of those concessions becomes visible. A revision to a key spending provision, reduced by nearly $85 billion over a 10-year window, not eliminated, adjusted, enough to satisfy one faction, but not enough to destabilize the rest. Signal number 7, because this is no longer a fixed bill. It's a moving target, shaped by the votes it needs to survive. By 2:28 p.m., a second adjustment is introduced, a delay mechanism. Implementation pushed back by 18 months for certain provisions. Why? Because timing matters, not just economically, politically. And delaying impact can secure support without changing the structure. But here's the catch. Delays don't remove consequences. They postpone them. And postponed consequences still arrive. By 3:02 p.m., the internal friction reaches its peak. Not visible, not public, but intense. Because now the factions are not debating principles. They're negotiating outcomes. One senator demands stricter deficit controls. Another pushes for state-level flexibility. A third warns that any further changes could cost another vote. And that's the balancing act. Every move forward risks a step back. Signal number 8, because the margin is razor thin. 1 vote gained, 1 vote lost, and the entire equation changes. But here's the catch. Momentum is still moving forward, slowly but consistently, because leadership is now coordinating every element: timing, messaging, commitments, all aligned toward one objective: 51. By 3:41 p.m., another layer of pressure is applied. External, public. Statements from key figures reinforce the urgency. This must pass, not later. Now. Because delay introduces risk, political risk, market uncertainty, narrative instability, and those risks extend beyond Washington. Because fiscal policy doesn't stay contained. It spreads through markets, through expectations, through confidence. If the bill passes, stability signals, markets hold, confidence rises. If it fails, uncertainty spikes, markets react, confidence drops. That's the domino effect, and it happens fast. That's not speculation. That's what officials are saying privately. But here's the catch. Markets react to signals, not just outcomes. And right now the signal is unclear. By 4:12 p.m., the final push begins. Not formally, but effectively. Because every remaining vote is now being engaged directly. No intermediaries, no delays, just conversations, face-to-face, phone-to-phone. And those conversations are decisive, because at this stage there is no more room for broad strategy, only targeted persuasion. By 4:36 p.m., one of the leaning votes shifts from uncertain to yes, signal number 9. Because now the count moves, 49 confirmed, 2 leaning, 1 unknown, and suddenly the path becomes visible, not guaranteed, but real. But here's the catch. That last unknown vote carries disproportionate power, because it can decide everything. By 5:08 p.m., attention narrows completely. All focus, all pressure, all negotiation, directed at one office, one decision, one answer. And that's where the process becomes most fragile. Because when everything depends on one variable, the system becomes unstable. But here's the catch. That instability can resolve quickly if the answer is yes, or collapse just as quickly if it's no. By 5:27 p.m., the final conversation begins. No aides, no notes, just direct exchange. Because at this point, the decision is not about policy details. It's about commitment, alignment, trust in the process. And that's harder to secure than any provision in the bill. By 5:49 p.m., the room clears. No announcement, no statement, just movement. And movement in Washington is often the first signal, because decisions are rarely declared immediately. They are indicated through action, through timing, through preparation, signal number 10. Because now leadership begins preparing for a vote window, not confirmed, but scheduled, tentative, flexible. And that preparation suggests one thing: confidence. Not certainty, but confidence. By 6:18 p.m., the count is updated again. 50. Confirmed. 1 leaning. No unknowns. And that changes everything. Because now the threshold is within reach. Not hypothetical. Immediate. But here's the catch. A leaning vote is not a guaranteed vote. It can still shift, still change, still collapse under pressure. By 6:42 p.m., the final alignment push begins. Short conversations, direct assurances, last-minute adjustments, because this is the moment where deals are finalized, not rewritten. And by 7:03 p.m., the signal arrives. Subtle, but clear. The final vote is moving toward yes, signal number 11, because with that shift, the equation resolves. 51. The number is reached, not officially. Not yet, but internally. And that internal confirmation is what matters, because once the votes are secured, the outcome is set. But here's the catch. The vote still hasn't happened, and until it does, the system remains exposed, because last-minute shifts do happen. Unexpected changes do occur, and nothing is final until it is. By 7:38 p.m., the chamber begins to prepare. Not visibly, but procedurally. Schedules adjust, staff mobilize, documents finalize, because the process is now transitioning from negotiation to execution. And execution is faster, more rigid, less flexible. By 8:12 p.m., the system stabilizes, temporarily, because the uncertainty has narrowed. The variables have reduced. The outcome is within reach, but not yet locked. And that final gap is the most critical, because it determines whether momentum holds or breaks. And within the next 24 to 72 hours, that determination will be made. Either the vote passes, and Republicans demonstrate full alignment, or it fails, and the strategy collapses. And if it collapses, the consequences extend far beyond this bill, because failure here signals weakness, division, instability, and those signals travel through markets, through politics, through future negotiations. But if it passes, it sends the opposite signal: control, unity, capability, and those signals matter, because they shape what comes next. So now everything depends on execution, not strategy, not messaging, execution. Because the plan is set, the numbers are close, the outcome is near, and the only thing left is the vote. Pass or fail, control or collapse, victory or setback. 8:41 p.m. Eastern Time. Inside the Senate chamber, the lights remain steady, the desks unchanged, but the atmosphere is different, tighter, quieter, focused. Because everyone in that room understands what this vote represents. Not just a budget, not just a policy shift. Control, signal number 12. The clerk prepares the roll, names listed. Order fixed. Because once the sequence begins, it cannot be altered. Here's what nobody is telling you. By the time the first name is called, the outcome is already known. Not publicly, but internally. Because leadership does not bring a vote to the floor unless the numbers are there. But here's the catch. Knowing the outcome and executing it are not the same thing. Because execution introduces risk, last-minute hesitation, unexpected shifts, political calculation in real time. And that's where everything becomes fragile again. At 8:52 p.m., the first votes begin, one by one. No speeches, no debate. Just answers, yes or no. And with each vote, the count updates, quietly, mentally. Because every senator in that room is tracking the same number, 51, signal number 13. Because as the count builds, the tension shifts from uncertainty to confirmation. 45, 46, 47, each number narrowing the gap, each vote reducing the margin for failure. But here's the catch. The critical votes are not early. They are placed strategically, later in the sequence, because timing matters, and timing can influence perception. By 9:07 p.m., the count reaches 49. 2 more needed. 2 votes that have been negotiated, adjusted, and pressured for hours, and now they must decide. Because there is no more room for delay, no more space for reconsideration. This is the moment. The first of those 2 names is called. A pause, brief but noticeable, because even hesitation becomes a signal. And then, yes, signal number 14, because that single word changes the entire equation. 50, one vote away. And suddenly the outcome is no longer theoretical. It is immediate, but here's the catch. The final vote still matters, because 50 is not enough. 50 creates a tie, and a tie introduces uncertainty. The vice president becomes the deciding factor, and while that is a path, it is not the preferred one, because relying on a tie is not the same as demonstrating unity. By 9:14 p.m., the final name approaches. Last variable, the last uncertainty, the last decision. And in that moment, the entire system compresses. Hours of negotiation, days of planning, weeks of strategy, all reduced to a single response. Yes or no. The name is called. A longer pause this time, because the weight is clear. Everyone knows what this vote represents. And then, yes, signal number 15, 51. The number is reached, not projected, not assumed, confirmed. And with that confirmation, the system shifts instantly from tension to outcome. Because once the threshold is crossed, the result is locked. The remaining votes become procedural, symbolic, because the decision has already been made. But here's the catch. Passing the vote is not the end. It's the beginning, because now the consequences activate immediately. Markets respond. Not dramatically at first, but noticeably, because certainty replaces uncertainty, and markets prefer certainty. Political dynamics shift, because unity, even narrow unity, sends a signal: control, capability, execution. And those signals extend beyond Washington, into future negotiations, into policy expectations, into global perception. That's the domino effect, and it begins the moment the vote is secured. That's not speculation. That's what officials are saying privately. But here's the catch. Unity achieved under pressure is not always stable, because the same divisions that existed before the vote do not disappear after it. They remain below the surface, waiting. And those divisions will matter in the next vote, in the next negotiation, in the next crisis. By 9:38 p.m., the chamber begins to clear, not abruptly. Gradually, because the process is complete, the decision made, the outcome set, and what remains is interpretation, because every side will frame this differently: victory or compromise, strength or division. And those narratives will shape what comes next. But here's the catch. Narratives do not change outcomes. They influence perception, and perception influences future decisions. By 10:06 p.m., the first statements begin to emerge, carefully worded, strategically framed, because messaging is now the priority, not persuasion. And messaging determines how the outcome is received, internally, externally, politically. But the underlying reality remains unchanged. The vote passed, the strategy worked, the numbers held. And that matters, because in a system built on margins, holding the margin is everything. So as the night settles over Washington, the immediate uncertainty fades, not completely, but enough. Because the question of will it pass has been answered. Yes, but the next question is already forming. What comes next? Because every decision creates a new set of variables, new pressures, new dynamics. And those dynamics will begin to unfold almost immediately. Because policy does not pause. It continues, evolves, expands, and sometimes complicates. So within the next 24 to 72 hours, the focus will shift from passage to impact, from alignment to consequence, from strategy to execution. And those consequences will define whether this moment becomes a turning point or just another step in a longer process. Because in the end, there are still only two outcomes: momentum or backlash, stability or friction, control or challenge. And which path emerges will depend on what happens next.